Hello everyone. Good afternoon from here. So we'll be getting started now. Let's welcome Ashley for she's just joining now. Thank you very much for the opportunity to have you on our community call for today. And then so the session for today focuses on redefining problems, reimagine solutions, design thinking approach. And trust me, I believe there is a lot for us to learn. Please, if you have anybody you know that would not want to miss out on this, kindly share while this session goes on. Thank you very much. Ashley.
All right, thanks a lot. It's a pleasure to be here. I'll turn on my camera for a second, just to say hi. I think I'll switch it off for a little bit, and then I might switch it back on after I relocate. But for network purposes, I'll leave it off for now. So hi everybody, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to share my screen and take us through some slides. So let me start by just introducing myself briefly. And thank you again to Joshua and the team for organizing this session. This is a topic I'm really passionate about and always excited to meet new people and new groups. So I'll just introduce myself briefly so you know who's speaking, and then we'll dive right into the content. And then I think our format for today is I'll go through some content and then we'll save some time for Q&A at the end. But that being said, feel free if you have questions, comments, thoughts, feel free to drop them in the chat throughout the session, even before the Q&A. I might not, if I'm screen sharing, I'm not always going to be able to see raised hands and chats. So if there's anything I need to be aware of, just go ahead and unmute and you can shout because we're not too large of a group. So about me and about my company. So Semicolon Africa is driving digital transformation in Africa, and we do a few things. One of which is building talent, tech-focused talent. We're really addressing a few problems, which is that companies in Africa and around the world are saying they can't find the right tech talent. But at the same time, we know a lot of young people in Nigeria and across Africa who are looking for opportunity. So it seemed like an obvious solution for us to build.
Sorry, Ashley. I think there was an accidental muting.
Okay, I've seen it. I've unmuted. You can hear me now, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so Semicolon, we train talent and put them in jobs. We provide companies that need help building their technology. We help them. We also work with startups. And just to introduce myself briefly, so I'm the co-founder and chief operating officer of Semicolon, originally from the US, but I have been living in Nigeria since I moved to Nigeria in 2012 after I got married. I'm also working with a Catalyst Fund, which is a fund that supports, helps companies, early stage companies that are driving climate adaptation in Africa. And I'm the climate champion for Nigeria. So I also kind of, I'm involved with climate smart innovation in Nigeria. And previously, if anybody's interested in the financial space or fintech, I used to be CEO of an organization called IFINA that promotes financial inclusion. You can call me Ashley or Oluwakemi. So I want us to just start with a little bit of reflection. What is a problem you've observed in the past week? And I actually want you to if you're able to type, please drop your response in the chat. So I'll give us just a second and I'll look at the chat for a minute to talk about any problem you've observed in the past week. It doesn't have to be a technical problem. It can be any kind of problem. Well, problem maybe that relates to, it really could be any kind of problem, actually. So you you were poor this week. That's a problem, right? So maybe you couldn't afford something that you wanted or needed to purchase. It could be a problem related to maybe you were moving from point A to point B today and you had a problem with transportation. It could be something like you were trying to study and you didn't have light, right? So any kind of, okay, poor time management, right? Exactly. Financial problems count for sure. Okay, so I see financial problems, time management. Others just can share really any kind of problem. Okay, power, NEPA, network issues, time management. Interesting. I'll give it like 30 more seconds. Okay, network. Okay, interesting. Lack of food options, which can be for a lot of reasons. And unfortunately, talking to people in the agri space, it's a very challenging environment right now. Okay, good. So you can keep dropping your problems in the chat if you want. I see somebody, Kudus, I see you raising your hand. Did you want to speak? Okay, you took it down. So let me continue. So good. So we know that we're surrounded by different types of problems, right? Of different magnitudes. What I want to talk about today is how do we solve those problems? So we know that we see a lot of it when we have problems that are unsolved. That's basically an opportunity for innovation. And sometimes it can be an opportunity to create a company or a product, right? Sometimes it can be a business opportunity as well. But we also see a lot of those innovative or emerging solutions fail, right? And why do they tend to fail? One common reason is lack of product market fit. So they're creating a solution that people don't want, right? And there can be a few other elements of product market fit, which I'll cover in the next slide. So, or sorry, the slide after this. So one of the ways, a technique that we can use for developing innovative solutions that are going in the right direction, that people actually want, and achieve product market fit is design thinking. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So design thinking is an approach to developing innovative solutions. And it's a way of thinking and working, as well as sort of a process and a collection of methods. And so today, what I want to do is sort of introduce design thinking holistically, touch on some of the specific methods just to build sort of awareness of what design thinking is and maybe give you a few tools in your toolkit, and then connect you to some further resources. So when we're doing design thinking, we really want, I talked about product market fit, right? That the issue is a lot of times people, startups, companies are investing in creating solutions, but people don't want them. So when we do design thinking, we always start with what's desirable for people, right? What do the humans in the center of this who are experiencing this problem, what do they want? What do they need? What's going to reduce the impact of that problem for them, right? So we always start with that. So let's say we take an example of a common problem in Lagos, which is transportation and traffic, right? So when you ask people about top problems or challenges in Lagos, it's very common
Hello, Ashley. I think we lost you there.
Yes, sorry, my see problems, network issues. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Apologies.
Yes, ma'am.
I have hotspotting from my phone and I had plugged it in, but didn't realize my husband switched off the outlet. Okay, great. So we're talking about the design thinking approach, and I was saying that we always want to start with what's desirable for people. So if we take the example of traffic and transportation, what we would start with is understanding the experience of people, right? What's painful for them? What do they want? So let's say people tell us that what they want, maybe we realize there are a lot of people who live on the mainland, they're working on the island, they have to commute to work, they spend a lot of time every day, right? If we build something that they want, it would, let's say they want instant transportation, right? So they want to be able to leave their house and then immediately arrive at work. So that's desirable to them. But is that the end of the solution? No, right? Because as of today, we don't have teleportation, right? There's no technology that I'm aware of that exists for a person to physically go from Ikorodu to VI instantly, right? So we also have to think about what's feasible, which really just means what can we actually create using the technology, the tools, the resources available to us, and maybe even the skills of the team that's building or creating. So if we go back to transportation as an example, we say, okay, teleportation is not feasible. But if somebody wants to go from Ikeja, right, to VI, very quickly, what's feasible? Helicopters, right? So we say, okay, all of you people who are commuting to your bank jobs, you'll use helicopters for transport. But is that the right solution? It's still not, right? And why not? Because it's too expensive. The money doesn't make sense. So the last thing that we need to think about when we're creating a solution is it economically viable? Which just means can we create a valid business case out of it, or business approach or business model, right? So can we create this? Do people want the solution? Can we build the solution? But can we also deliver it to them in such a way that they can afford to pay for it at least as much as it's costing us to deliver that solution, right? Or if you're looking at a solution that's going to be deployed by government, for example, when consumers are not paying, then you look at the budget, right? Is this within budget in terms of what we can afford and get approved? So it's really that sweet spot where this star is that we're trying to find, is the intersection of what people want, which is where we always start, but then also what we can build, what we can create, and create a business model around. And I will say, as a side note, for all of you, there are many ways in which you can be innovating and creating solving problems. You may even now be able to start working on a startup, for example. But what might be more like some of the use cases, right, for your group might be if you're competing in a hackathon, for example. You'll need to think about all three of these things. Even if you're not putting out a product, you probably need to take into consideration the economic viability as well as the other components. If you start working, or when you start working, right? Even if you're not an entrepreneur, you'll do well if you're an entrepreneur, which is somebody who's innovating and coming up with new solutions, even though they're in the workforce of a potentially large company. Or product within the context of an existing business, you can still use these approaches to innovation, and you'll still be thinking about these three things. So let me tell you a story. This is a picture of some of the women in our community at Semicolon in our building in Yaba. And I just took this picture because it's from a recent event. This isn't a real story. This is fictional, hypothetical. But I put a few pictures in the deck just to make it a little bit more engaging. So we're not just looking at words on a Saturday afternoon and getting bored. So let's imagine, hypothetically, that these women, one of them has an asthma attack, and it prompts them to start thinking about air quality. Right? So they start looking around, and for the first time, they're really thinking about this problem. If they're going through the design thinking approach, the first thing that they're going to do is start to frame their challenge. And the way we do that is using what's called a problem statement. So we write down the problem we're trying to solve as a short question that starts with the phrase, how might we? I'll say as a side note, there are some different ways you can write problem statements. And if you read other books, you might see some other approaches, which are all equally valid. But for the sake of simplicity, my preferred approach is to do this simple sentence starting with how might we? So the challenge we were looking at was air quality, right? That was the problem. And in this case, it was sort of related to a health challenge that came up. So if we were going to create a problem statement related to this challenge, can anybody, take 30 seconds and drop in the chat. How would you create a problem statement related to that challenge of air quality? Good. So I saw, I tried to check the chat on my phone this time. I saw a few different types of problem statements, right? So how might there was some related to education. How might we educate people on the causes of poor? How might we address poor air quality, etc. So all of those are good problem statements. And we can see that the team, even though the team is looking at the same, all of us are thinking about the same problem, there are slightly different ways that different people in this session have framed that challenge. And so the way we set up this problem statement, this how might we question, will start to send the team in a certain direction in terms of exploration. So problem statement, you'll start off with. The problem statement you can change later on if you want. So as the team, and I forgot to say, but design thinking is really a team sport. So where possible, I really recommend doing it in groups. So at this stage, somebody who has this sees a problem and they want to solve it. One of the things they'll do is put together a team, ask other people to work with them, and then they'll work together to come up with this problem statement. So the team may start off with a problem statement of how might we educate people about air quality, for example. And later on, as they explore this issue more, they might decide that they want to shift their problem statement. Maybe they want to make it a little bit broader and say, how might we improve air quality in Lagos? Which we can see is a broader problem statement, can take them in some additional directions in terms of solutions. But conversely, somebody might have started with that broader problem statement of how might we improve air quality in Lagos, and maybe later on they decide to narrow it to something like that, educating people. Maybe they narrow it to focusing on a specific aspect of air quality, right? So these are all very valid ways of working, but having that problem statement helps to kind of align direction of the team. So I'll say for the example in this case, let's say the team lands on the problem statement, how might we improve air quality in Lagos? So that's the direction they're going. But what do they do next? This is an overview of the design thinking process. And what we see, and I'll say that if you read some books, they'll break out the process into some slightly different phases, but the kind of key elements of what happens are still the same. Some of the phases are just combined differently depending on whose book you're reading. But I like using these 6 phases. And really here, we're going through multiple steps to first make sure we learn as much as possible about the problem we're trying to solve, which is really kind of what's happening in these first 2 phases of understanding and observation. Then we define our point of view, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means. But we're making sense of everything we've learned in those first 2 phases. And so we're actually doing before we even start coming up with ideas. Once we have an idea, then we prototype and test them. And so one thing I want to highlight here is that the mistake people often make in terms of creating solutions that people don't want, or creating solutions that they can't afford to pay for or they can't build, is that they see a problem and then they jump straight. And they're often, and when we do that, we just miss. We tend to not get as robust solutions as we do if we go through these first phases of first really deeply understanding, observing, taking the time to do that sense making through defining our point of view. So what I'll do is I'll walk through each of these phases in some more detail and give us a few examples of methods. So coming back to our example, right? We have this team, they're working on their problem statement was what? How might we improve air quality in Lagos? So the first thing that they're going to do is understand the problem as much as they can. And there are various different methods we can use here. I think the most obvious one, and this is probably what you've all done in some form as students, is research, right? And a lot of this is desk research. You get out your computer, you go on Google, you in this phase, when we do desk research, we have to be very attentive to quality of sources, and there are ways that we can evaluate those sources. But I think that's a little bit more common, so I won't talk to that one too much. But there are a lot of other things we can do aside from desk research to really understand the problem. So for example, if we look at this case of air quality, the team can also interview some experts. If we think for a minute, who might be some experts that people could interview about air quality in Lagos? You can if you have any ideas, you can drop it in the chat.
Sorry, can you come again with that?
Yes. Sorry, what I was saying is, who are some experts? So if you wanted to understand more about air quality in Lagos, and you want to go and speak with an expert about that topic in order to learn more. Okay, LAMA, right? So the waste management, arm of government. Good. They should have some perspective. Who's another expert that you could request to go and meet and speak with? Okay, environmentalists, right? Good. So, and you can keep dropping your thoughts in the chat as we go on. So you could talk to environmentalists. Maybe there are professors, including in your universities, who work on this topic. You could meet somebody from maybe a multinational organization that's focused on air quality, like UN, for example, right? So there are a lot of different experts that you could approach in this space. And even as students, it's appropriate to write a polite letter or request or LinkedIn note or whatever it is, and say, look, we're working on this project. Let's say for a hackathon, we want to understand more about this topic. Would you be willing to speak with us for 30 minutes so that we can understand better? And if you do that, then before the interview, you'd write down some questions. You can even share your questions ahead of time with the expert. You'll interview them. If they're comfortable with it, you can record, but you would take very good notes. And I often recommend, if you do conduct an expert interview, at the end of the interview, you can also ask them two questions. One is there anybody else that we should speak with on this topic? Because they can recommend some other experts and maybe even introduce you to those people. And number two is you can ask, are there any good resources that we should be reading or viewing or using? So they can help you kind of point you to additional resources at the end of that interview. So that's an example of another way to really deeply understand a particular problem. In this phase of understanding, so research, conducting desk research, conducting expert interviews, those are ways of sort of getting access to additional information that the team didn't already have or know. But we can also at this phase sort of analyze or do some sense making around, or maybe mental exploration around the things that we already do know. So for example, I like this tool called the Trends Matrix, which just really helps us think through the context a bit more and really helps the teams also think about trends, because we're not designing a solution that people want to use today. We're really trying to identify solutions that they'll want to use tomorrow, right? So that means we need to also be thinking about trends. So this is a tool. You just use a matrix that looks like this and fill it out with your team. And you say, for different categories, what were they doing in the past related to this problem? What are they doing today? And what's the emerging trend? And this is, for example, if we're talking about air quality, you could say, okay, your average Lagosian, right? Your average citizen living in Lagos. What were they doing in the past? In the past, let's say nobody really even thought about air quality. They're using, charcoal or other things for cooking. They're burning trash. They just sort of didn't think about it, right? We could say, okay, maybe today, the average Lagosian, some people are starting to think about air quality, and maybe where we are today currently is sort of emerging awareness, right? And then what's an emerging trend is maybe at least some citizens are trying to take more actions to improve air quality. So some people are starting to care more, maybe awareness is growing, etc. Right? So that would be an example of filling out a row on this trends matrix related to citizens and the topic of air quality. So filling out this table just helps the team sort of think through a topic more deeply. So let's say that our team, so they've gone through all various methods to better understand this challenge. Now we're starting to think about the people in the center of this situation. So we're thinking about either user needs or sort of stakeholder needs, as the case may be. This quotation, which is attributed to Henry Ford, I'm not sure if it was really said by him, but either way, it's useful, right? and Henry Ford was um, the founder of Ford Automotive Company, really, which kind of started the passenger automobile business, right? So this quotation says, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. The key takeaway being that although we want to talk to people and users and ask them what they want, sometimes people don't know even what they should ask for, right? But so therefore, we don't want to, when we get into this second phase of observation in the design thinking process, we want to talk to people and ask them what they want, but also go beyond that into a much wider range of observation. So I'll just give examples of a few methods here. One is shadowing. And just like it sounds like, you're basically becoming somebody's shadow, right? So you're not interrupting them, you're not interacting with them, but you'd ask, one or more people permission, obviously, to shadow them. And then you just follow them going through their actual kind of life or work, whatever it is that you're trying to observe. And this could be depending on what you're trying to learn more about. It could be for an hour or two. It could be for a week. It sort of depends on the context. So for example, if we were shadowing in context of this scenario we're talking about, maybe you would look at daily lives of a range of different people. Maybe you shadow sort of a market woman who's in an open air market close to a road. Shadow some other people as well. Another method we can use is called fly on the wall observation. And this term comes from the expression, I wish I was a fly on the wall in that meeting or in that room. The idea is that if you're having a meeting or you're eating dinner, you're in a building with some other people, nobody notices the fly that's sitting on the wall, but it can be sitting there quietly and observing everything that's going on. So similarly, in this method, we're also quietly observing without interacting with anybody, but just sort of looking at a situation as it unfolds. And you can look at the situation from several different points of view, right? So if you were observing traffic, for example, you might want to stand at one corner of the junction and observe how people are waiting to cross the street, observe how, cars and Okada are interacting there. Then maybe you climb up onto the pedestrian overpass and you look down and you'll be able to see, you'll see the traffic flow differently if you're looking at it from the top, right? From a bird's eye view. So we're just taking different points of view. And here we're observing and we're reflecting. One way that we can capture our observation is this what, how, why set of questions. So ask and write down your notes in terms of what are people doing? How are they doing it? And at least to the best of our understanding, why are they doing it? So for example, I gave the example of observing traffic at a junction. Maybe you observe that there's a pedestrian bridge are crossing the street without using that pedestrian bridge, right? And then you can start to ask your team why. And you may want to then move into another method, which is interviewing people and actually ask them, okay, why are you crossing the road in this way? Why are you not using the pedestrian bridge? To get a deeper understanding of their motivation and the choices they're making, and maybe their pain points as well. So if we go back to the example that we were looking at before, the team, if they were doing some fly on the wall observation and they're walking around Lagos, they're thinking about air quality. Let's say these are some of the things that they're observing, right? So they're going to see traffic. They're going to see the exhaust coming out of Danfo trucks, other vehicles. They see people using generators and the smoke coming from that. They see industrial activity because there are factories and industrial activity in some parts of Lagos. They see the pollutants as a result of that process. They see people burning trash, right? Paying focused attention, they can start to really think more broadly and learn about this challenge. So I spoke about interviews a bit, right? So we talked about interviewing experts before, but when we're doing design thinking, oftentimes we also want to interview the people in the center of that challenge or that problem, right? So if we're interviewing people related to this topic of air quality, this could be just your average citizens, right? So I gave example, maybe market woman, if we're looking at air quality, right? Maybe the team interviews some small business owners who are running generators. Maybe the team interviews some parents to understand what their thoughts are about air quality related to the health of their families. There could be maybe the team interviews people who are selling biscuits in traffic, right? Because they're always surrounded by trucks and exhaust and things like that. To understand if they think about air quality, does it affect them? Are they experiencing any health problems? Things like that, right? So an interview is just an open-ended conversation with those people. And again, our goal is in these interviews is really just to learn as much as possible about these people's experience and their perspective. So oftentimes we'll go and meet them where they are. So if you were interviewing, for example, the guy who sells biscuits in traffic, you'll go and meet him in traffic, right? Or at least maybe take a rest and sit at the bus stop nearby and talk to him a little bit, right? And what we do here is we'll plan. We might write down some questions ahead of time. We want to make them comfortable, and then just listen very deeply and take notes. If they're comfortable with it, you can take pictures. If they're comfortable, you can record as well. But again, we just want to learn as much as possible about what's happening in this situation. So now we've gone through these first two phases, understanding, observation. Then the third phase here is defining our point of view. And what we're doing in defining our point of view is really making sense of everything we learned. So understanding, observation, we want to some extent, almost even forget the assumptions we had before, right? Or the things we thought we knew before. So we're just learning as much as possible. In this third define point of view phase, now we're trying to say, okay, what does that mean? So that we can sort of position ourselves to go in the right direction for coming up with solutions or ideas. So I like I like this comic strip, but I like this particular comic. So you see a junior person is a colleague is asking, what do you think? Junior person says, is this the right answer? A senior person asks, is this even the right question? So one of the things that we'll do at this define point of view phase is even come back and check our problem statement, right? That how might we do X, Y, Z? The team may decide at this point to change their problem statement, to make it a bit broader, a bit narrower, maybe go in a slightly different direction, right? So we're asking ourselves, really, what's the direction that we want to be going in? Are there more questions that we want to ask? I'll give, oops, I put the wrong title on this slide, but this is actually a method called statement starters. And here we're sort of have a structured way in a fairly simple format to start taking the observations and our insights and send us in a direction, right? So what you do is basically answer the questions that you see on the right side of the screen. You say, we met. So like let's say we met Iya Tope, right, who's selling dodo on the side of the road, right? We were surprised to notice that she, I don't know, what can we be surprised by? Maybe we're surprised to notice that she had never really thought about air quality before, even though there's quite a bit of pollution around her from the traffic and even from like the fire that she's burning. We wonder if this means that there's an opportunity to educate people so that they can better manage their health and the environment. So actually that sort of took me into this last statement. So we could say it would be game changing to help people have a better understanding of how to manage their health and the environment, right? So that's an example of completing statement starters. And it sends us in a, but when we say it would be game changing too, we don't want to go too specifically into an exact solution. We just want to start thinking about a direction we could go in. In this defined point of view phase, we're also we can do a few things. So in this graphic and the picture in the top right just shows a team that came together and they said, okay, look, what are some of the key concepts that came out of all of our observation? They even hung up some pictures, right? And put everything on a board together. On the left, this is an example of a method called problem tree analysis. And what you basically do is you take the problem, put it in the middle. In this case, the problem is poor air quality in Lagos. And you ask why, right? Why is that problem occur? And you put those causes underneath. So here, use of generators, vehicles, burning of trash, not enough trees, etc., right? And then for each of those causes, you can even keep asking why more and more times, right? So why are people using generators? Okay, because NEPA is not reliable, because solar is expensive, because they need electricity continuously to manage the businesses, etc., right? So as we go down the page, we're asking why more times and really mapping out all of those root causes. And this is, the team is using everything that they've been learning through their desk research, their interviews, etc., to be able to fill out this problem tree, right? When we go up, then we ask, okay, so not why is this happening, but what is the effect of this issue of poor air quality? And there are many, I just put two here, right? So health issues, increased child mortality actually is shown. Rates of child mortality go up in places that have poor air quality, for example, right? And there could be various other effects. People don't want to move to your city, etc. So the team will go through all of this analysis, right? And start to refine their thinking. Then after they've done all of that, they've set the stage nicely to ideate, which is coming up with ideas or solutions, right? So as they're going through that, there are many methods we can use here. I'll just list a few of them, right? I think brainstorming is the one that people are most familiar with, so I won't really spend time talking about that. Although I will say, if you're brainstorming with the team, there are tips on how to brainstorm effectively that I suggest looking up. But I'll talk about a few other methods. One I didn't put in the slide, but there's something called a creative matrix you can use to also just push the team to think about a broad range of ideas. I'll talk about these other ones though. So one method, again, we're just kind of nudging ourselves to come up with a wide range of ideas. This is called Scamper. And you just think about an existing solution and all of the ways you could sort of change it around to better solve the problem. So can you substitute something? Can you combine? Can you adapt, modify, rearrange, eliminate part of it, right? Put something to other uses. So you look at, this example is for a car, right? But whatever the problem is you're working on, the Scamper method just sort of pushes the team to think of a wide range of ideas by asking all of these questions. Another method that I like is alternative worlds. So this is where we go to another world or another industry or another scenario to just draw inspiration. And so I'll give some examples. So I guess this group is probably young, right? So it's possible none of you have given birth, but me, I've given birth. And in general, actually, we're globally trying to move people toward giving birth in contexts where they have good medical care, right? To reduce maternal mortality, reduce child mortality. So many women will give birth in a hospital. Now, when you give birth, you're there for some time in labor, and then you don't leave immediately after the baby is born. You may stay in the hospital for 1 night, 2 nights, depending, right? Maybe even longer. So if we look at this, this does not look like a fun space to be spending a few nights, right? Where you've also got, it's you, the person who gave birth, it's your baby, it's your husband or your partner, family might be coming in, right? It's just not an appealing setting to be spending that time. So a team was looking at the problem statement. How might we improve the experience of giving birth in hospital settings? So can anybody guess? You can drop in the chat. Can anybody guess an alternative world they might look at? Another just different setting or industry that they may have gone to draw inspiration for making hospitals more comfortable for people who are giving birth or have newborns. I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it. No ideas yet. Okay, I'll tell you the answer, but you can still think. In this case, one of the places that this team went is hotels, hospitality, right? So a hotel room is similar in that it's also, you have different people coming in and out, right? Could be every night, every few nights. But the purpose of a hotel room is different, right? The hotel wants to make people as comfortable as they can really afford to make them, so that the person has a good experience and uses them again or recommends them. So the team, if a team is asking this question, how do we make hospitals more conducive or give a better experience to people who have given birth? It's not to say that they're going to turn the hospital into a hotel room, because there are different purposes, right? But they can draw some insights and inspiration. So looking at this picture, they could say, okay, the lighting is more pleasant, right? And that makes it a more pleasant experience. The color scheme has been deliberately designed and is very like soothing, relaxing colors. They put some flowers to have some decoration. They put a TV for entertainment, right? So these things, although a hospital will need to retain some functions, they could maybe change the lighting, change the colors that are used, maybe even change some of the comfort of the bedding and put some extra pillows, right? And those could be things that could potentially be feasible and help make the experience of giving birth in a hospital more comfortable. So I'll give one more example. If we look at injections, right? We know a lot of children and even adults don't like taking injections. So if I ask my children, if I tell them we have to go to the doctor, the first thing that they're going to ask is, do we have to take injection? So a team was looking at the problem statement. How do we increase the rate of vaccinations, right, to support health outcomes? And they looked at, okay, why are people not getting vaccinated? And one of the reasons is because it's painful. They're afraid they don't like it. So they're trying inspiration around coming up with a less painful or unpleasant way to administer vaccinations. So again, I'll just give you like 10 seconds to think about what's an alternative world or alternative thing that they could look at to draw inspiration for making it less painful to get a needle injected in your skin. And in this case, okay, good. So oral vaccines, right? So using a different method of delivery could be one, so that you don't have to have injections. One of the things so some researchers looked at understanding that certain medication does still need to be injected, at least until new technology is invented. There was a team that looked at ways to still use a needle, but make it less uncomfortable. And they drew inspiration from mosquitoes, right? So I think we all know that a mosquito can land on you, bite you, and fly away again before you realized it was even there, because it's figured out a way to be really, so not only low in pain, but really imperceptible. So they took mosquitoes and they really analyzed how mosquitoes sort of insert their proboscis into people's skin and etc. And we're able to design different shape and maybe even approach, I can't remember, but a different type of needle that was less painful than ones that had been used previously. So those are some examples of alternative worlds for coming up with ideas. So let's say the team, and in the ideation phase, you want to come up with lots of ideas and then start to structure and select the ideas that the team will move forward with. And once we decide to start moving forward, then we want to build prototypes and test them. A prototype is really just a tangible artifact that we're using to both refine the idea as well as to test it and get feedback as quickly as possible. And we'll have different resolution levels of prototypes. Oftentimes early on, we create what's called low resolution prototypes. And these are done very fast, they're inexpensive, but they don't really look, they won't look exactly like the final solution. The prototype, we're just creating as quickly as possible to test key hypotheses or test key elements of the solution. So for example, if you were prototyping, if you wanted to come up with some new kinds of glasses, eyeglasses, an early low resolution prototype, it might just be cardboard and tape that's combined together, because maybe what you're trying to prototype is an innovative shape in terms of the frame, right? So that would be a low resolution prototype. Later, once the team has refined a bit, a higher resolution prototype for that frame could be generated via some other substance, and maybe even 3D printing or something, right? So those are lower or high resolution prototypes. And there are lots of different kinds of prototypes we can create. So some are physical, it depends on what you're trying to build and test. There can be things like storyboards. So if you have a service, you can write out a storyboard. It almost looks like a comic strip, saying we do first the customer does step 1, then they do step 2. You draw pictures, you put some text to explain. For people who are building software solutions, will also often use wireframe diagrams using a tool like Figma, for example. And we'll design, okay, the user is going to go from this screen has these buttons, you click here, it takes you to this screen, etc. Right? But there are lots of other kinds. I like this Wizard of Oz prototyping. Means that basically the user experiences something as if it is a fully built solution, but behind the scenes, people are doing things manually. So for example, I can't remember what the company was, but somebody forwarded something the other day saying that there was a company that said they were offering AI generated recommendations. But in the first phase, when somebody typed something into the platform, it was actually going to some people working in like a center in the Philippines who were manually coming up with recommendations and sending them back. So it could take anything between a few minutes to a few hours, depending on how busy those people were, right? But to the customer, they typed something in the platform, and at some point they got a response back. And they didn't know it wasn't really AI, that it was actually humans. Now, of course, I don't recommend lying to your customers, right? So I wouldn't tell them it's AI if it's not. But sometimes you want to test something with some customers before you go through all of the time and effort and expense of building out all the technology. Sometimes there are kind of good reasons for using Wizard of Oz prototyping. So this is really a terrible image, but let's say that this team, their idea was they've observed that there were a lot of small businesses running generators. And they talked to those businesses, and the businesses said they hate running generators. But the reason that they do it is because they need light for their business, and they just don't, even if the ones who want to use other solutions, they don't know how to find it, they don't know how to pay for it. They think solar is complicated and expensive, and they don't even know who to meet, right? So the team comes up with an idea set about how do we create a platform that helps the average Lagosian, small, medium business find the right solar solution and the right financial service providers that are going to allow them pay for it in installments so they can afford it, right? So let's say that they build a prototype. In this case, they want to just test out sort of how users might interact with an app or a website. So this is my kind of bad version of what that prototype might look like in terms of that website, right? Some of the fields that they would have to fill in. Now, they don't have to have built all the technology behind the scenes if they're testing how users interact with this screen, right? They could just build out a form, like a Google form, or kind of put it in a Word document or something. Or they do kind of like, maybe they build out the front end, but they've not, the data isn't going anywhere. They're just trying to get a sense of how users are feeling as they're engaging, right? So they've built that prototype, and then the last thing that they're going to do is test it, right? So they engage with different people, different users, different stakeholders, and they just observe them again using this solution. They ask lots of questions. One way when we're testing, I like a simple grid, which is the people who built the solution. They capture, what do people like? What's the constructive criticism, the things that they wish were different? Did any questions come up? And then did any ideas come up that were created by the users or the team? So one thing that I'll mention, I didn't mention before, although I made this process look very linear, you go from understand to observe to define point of view, etc. It's really actually iterative in practice. And iterative just means you might go back to earlier phases again and again. So maybe you start building a prototype and the team realizes, actually, we don't really understand some aspect of the problem as well as we want to. And they go back to do more research, right? Or maybe they'll say, actually, we don't really understand this group of users, and they go do some more observations, some more user interviews. But that's just kind of a general walkthrough of the design thinking process. And after enough rounds and iterations, hopefully we should land on a final solution that's desirable, that's feasible, and that's economically viable. So I'll go through a quick case study really fast, which is savings. So around the world, banks, government, NGOs, etc., have tried to encourage people to save more. So there's a major bank in the US called Bank of America. They worked with a design firm called IDEO, and they went through this design thinking process. And what they ended up building is something called Keep the Change. So they noticed that Americans, who were the customers for this bank, would, especially when they used cash, they would maybe they bought a sandwich. The sandwich costs $4.70. The person would take out a $5 bill, and then the change that they got, they would drop it in the tip jar, right? Or people would come home at the end of the day, and any spare change in their pocket, they'll drop into a jar, right? And they'll be building that change over time, and maybe after a few months, they go deposit it in the bank. Or people would round up if they're making a donation. And the suggested donation is $17, they just round it to $20, for example, right? So they saw this behavior of people liking to sort of round up to a whole number. And the solution they came up with is people could opt in, bank customers, that if they were using their debit card to make purchases or their credit cards, they could say, okay, Bank of America, I want you to round up the purchase. So if the cost is $4.70, I want you to debit dollars from my card, but I want you to put that change into a savings account. So they're automatically, without thinking about it, like saving small money with every time that they're making purchases, and that money added up over time. And so that came out of a lot of interviews, observation, and then later prototyping and testing before they launched that product. I'm going to skip this because we've gone a bit long. I think the last thing I'll say about design thinking, I said that it's a way of thinking and working, as well as a collection of methods and tools. So some of the mindsets for us to think about is bias for action, right? So if you're not sure whether a solution is going to work or not, instead of debating it for weeks and weeks and weeks, you can just go out, build a quick prototype and test it, right? So we want to be active. I would say love learning. If you don't love learning today, and it's not your fault because the educational system may have beaten that love out of you, but see how you can find that love again. We want to embrace failure, meaning that if you're innovating, you're going to fail somewhere somehow. So you better make sure that failure happens as fast as possible and on as small of a scale as possible. So we're going out, we're taking risks, but we're also really being open to learning. And that goes to this next point. We're willing to change our mind. Even if we think our solution is great, don't fall in love with it, right? You have to go out and test it, prototype it, test it, and be willing to take honest feedback. And then the last thing I would say is we want to work in teams, right? And support one another as best we can. So I can drop these links in the chat. But if you're interested in design thinking, so for example, let's say you're doing a hackathon, you're doing a project. There are some good books. There are also some sites like this ideo.org design kit that just has some free resources, including some templates for a few of the methods I talked about. IBM Design Thinking is an online course that's also free. It's a little bit more business oriented, but it's in terms of free resources, I think it's pretty good. And there, of course, at Semicolon, we do design thinking as well. So the last thing I'm going to do before we open to Q&A, just check my time, is I just wanted to spend 2 minutes talking a little bit about one of our programs at Semicolon. So this is called the Techpreneurship Program. And basically, this is a 1-year intensive program that produces highly employable software engineers in Nigeria. Right now, we're running it physically at our location in Sabo Yaba. So if you're interested or you know anybody who's interested, at least for now, the training would take place there. I won't go through all of the details, but basically we go quite deep into software engineering. But we also believe, and really every employer always tells us, that they don't just want people with technical skills, they want problem solvers. So that's why we do much deeper than we did today, but deep training in design thinking, in critical thinking. We also partner with Henley Business School to do business management, entrepreneurship, and leadership training. And for the people who do, who enroll and then meet requirements in terms of attendance, assessments, etc., we guarantee a job for them as a software engineer. Let me skip over this because I don't want to talk for too long. I've been talking for a while. But there's a few examples of some of the people who have gone through our program as techpreneurs. So if you're interested in learning more, I know many of you are still in school, but we have a fair amount of people who have studied even computer science and then come to our program because they realize they need something else to really become competitive in today's global jobs market. So if you're interested in the future, you're welcome to follow us for more, or if you know anybody who this might be a fit for, please go ahead and pass it along. And the other thing is I'll drop my LinkedIn in the chat as well. Happy to connect and stay in touch with anybody going forward. So I've been talking for a while. Let me pause there. I will turn back to you, maybe Joshua. Do we want to just sort of open up for Q&A? So if anybody has questions, actually, I can also run Q&A. You're welcome to either raise your hand or drop them in the chat box, questions or comments. Hi, Joshua. No, I can't hear Joshua. Can anybody else hear him?
No, I can't hear Joshua either.
Yeah, Joshua, I
Maybe
don't think your microphone is working.
Yeah, I'll help him out until he gets back.
Sure.
Yep. So just like Ashley already said, if you have any questions, you can raise your hand or drop them in the chat. But just while they're doing that, I just wanted to ask also, Ashley, you shared all this with us and it's been really inspiring, honestly, giving a new perspective on how to go about building projects. So I wanted to understand, as regards technical projects now, let's say web development, or maybe you just want to build a website, right, for a particular purpose, how important, of course, they are important, but what approach can we also take when it's just maybe a simple personal project? But of course, you want to make sure that it's well thought out. How do you approach it in a simple technical way? But of course, it might not be as complex as this. But how can you achieve good results applying design thinking principles?
Yeah, thank you. It's a very good question. So I would say, generally in work, in school, in life, we always want to start with why. Why are we doing something? And in fact, there's a good book by someone called Simon Sinek, which is titled Start With Why. He also has a good TED Talk, which I can share, which basically covers this. But so I would say, in this, going to your example, let's say you're just building a simple website. First of all, go back to why are you doing it? And if it's a team working on it, then it's really actually important to have that conversation and align on the why, because your different team members actually might have slightly different motivation. So for example, you could be building a website because you want to learn and build your skills. And if that's your motivation, then that would probably push you to try really push your boundaries, right, in terms of what you can do. Maybe you'll use some technologies or tools you've not worked with before, put some kind of fancy bells and whistles on it because you want to just try your hand at building that, right? That would be very different than if you're building a website because you have a business need for a website, right? So if you've got a business need, then you would really start with deeply understanding that business. And I will say for people, and this applies to internal clients as well as external clients, actually, but let's say you were freelancing and somebody wants you to build a website, even if they send you an email and they say, I want you to build a website to do X and it should look like this. With clients, they don't always know exactly what they want. So you might want to go through it would just be like a very light touch, but you would still kind of go through some of these phases a bit, right? First of all, you might need to understand their business and kind of operating context a bit more. The observation, you would probably have some kind of interviews or meetings or engagement to really understand the client and their perspective and what they really want to do, and where their business is going, right? But you may also need to do like some engage with the users of the website, the potential users of like which are the customers of that client, right? To better understand what they really want, because it might be different than what the client who's commissioning you to build the website thinks they want, right? And then you would go, maybe there's some defined point of view, maybe not, but that's just kind of synthesis, right? Taking everything you've learned, setting a direction, coming up with ideas for, okay, you've told us that your business, or maybe you've learned, so I'm going to take that same example, like someone's paying you to build a website, right? They have a small business. They want to establish online presence. The client, let's bakery, right? And she says, okay, I want you to create a sort of static website that's going to give people information about our products and how they can reach us, right? But then as you're going out, you're learning more about the space, the trends, you're looking at what other similar companies are doing. You ask her where she wants to take her business, you interact with some customers. Maybe you realize that you recommend an entirely different approach, right? So maybe you say, okay, you can do some selling online. Don't build your own don't rebuild platforms that exist, but you can use existing platforms. But you can have a website, and there can be seamless ways for customers to go back and forth between your website and the like marketplace type platform, right? Maybe your customers some of them are still buying on Instagram and WhatsApp. What's a seamless way to link to those? Maybe your customers maybe your positioning is that you're a healthy bakery and your customers want to learn more. And so maybe you recommend that she has a blog, right? That she puts on the website. So these are examples of kind of going through a similar process, right? Of really understanding the motivation, the why behind the project, and then the context, the opportunities, the space for innovation. And then so you've come up with these different ideas. You can prototype them in different ways, right? You can kind of sketch it out. You can do some Figma designs to get feedback from her, to get feedback from her clients. Maybe you even test it with some clients a bit, right? And then you go ahead and build the website. So that's an example. And that all of that could be done. I mean, the example I gave started to get a bit broader in scope, right? But if you were doing like maybe a lighter touch version of that kind of building a website for a client that I just described, it could be done in a few days, right? Or a weekend. But generally, what's to happen with technology projects is that something is built. A lot of time, effort, money goes into building it. It's deployed, and then everybody realizes it's not working, right? It's not meeting user needs in some way. And then you have to kind of go back and do whether it's the feedback you took from the market, or then you go back and do the research or whatever. The team will sort of go, whether they know it or not, to start doing some of that research, observation, and rebuilding. So taking a little bit of time to just ask, okay, do I really understand? Okay, why am I doing this? Do I really understand the context? Do I really have deep empathy and understanding of the various users or stakeholders I need to understand or observe, right? Before I start. And then have I even really thought broadly in terms of ideas? Or am I just building something because that's what I built last time, or that's what I've always seen existing, right? So I guess maybe just to kind of tie up that response, I would say, like kind of where we started, design thinking is useful for many things, but it really drives us toward innovation, right? So I would personally suggest, innovating with at least being innovation minded with every project. Some of them will want to invest more deeply in innovating than others. But anytime that you're thinking about innovating, at least kind of thinking about these different steps can often help.
Thank you very much.
Wow, that's amazing. So can you hear me now?
Sorry?
Hi,
I didn't hear
hi,
that
Ashley,
last.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, that's fine. I'm so sorry, I had to join with my other device. I think my system mic must be having some technical issues. Oh wow, that's really amazing. That's really amazing. I think I took a whole lot from your session. It was really insightful. I think I'm also speaking on behalf of everyone that attended. So I don't know. Let's drop our questions in the chat box. If there's any question we want to ask, or we can just ask directly. Sorry?
Yeah, we've got one more question, so I can take this one as well. And then, as you mentioned, if anybody else has other questions, I'm happy to spend a few more minutes and take those also. So I see Asalu Paul's question in the chat, drawing the line between something that's wanted by the public and something that they can afford without compromising on the product. Yeah, I think so. Our market in Nigeria today is very challenging, right? I think when we talked about challenges like problems, somebody said they're poor this week, right? Financial problems. So, and that's just one of them. Which means it means that creating solutions in businesses is very difficult, but it also means there's a lot of market opportunity. Because there is a lot of unmet need. So I actually think one of the key places for innovation is actually around that question. How do you balance a solution that you can build that's affordable? But also I like this idea about like not compromising on the quality, right? So which kind of gets back to desirability, because what the customers wanted was some degree of quality or robustness of a solution. I mean, what can I say about that? I think this is part of the reason why oftentimes you're going to have to go through iterations, right? So the team might start off with an idea for a solution. I'm trying to think of a good example. I don't know, I can't think of one now, but let's say you come up with an idea for a solution. You know it's what people want. You have the technology to build it. It's going, let's say I'm trying to think of something off the top of my head. Maybe you're like trying to do some transportation within small communities like campus or other, maybe like larger estates or something, right? Within given communities. And the team sees an opportunity to do some sort of like bicycle, maybe it's electronic bicycles, right? That are ruggedized, and you can set up different stations and people can sort of check them out, pay electronically, go from point A to point B. So let's say that's your solution. You know that people want it because they've told you that they want that kind of you know that you have a few EV bicycle providers that could partner on it. You know you can build the app to manage it, right? And you say, okay, let's work the numbers. Maybe you say it's going to be like, let me make up a number, 300 Naira per ride, or per hour for people to use this bicycle, right? And you have some discussions with customers and they all tell you, okay, yes, we would pay for it. Then you put it out into realize people aren't paying that 300 Naira. And you ask people, you do some you dig deeper, right? To start to figure out why. Maybe you realize it's that decision point. Every time they're booking, they're like, is it going to be 300 Naira that I'm going to pay on this, or am I going to use it to buy some food? Let me just check and but then I can buy myself some food at the end, right? So maybe then you realize, okay, we've got to experiment a bit more around. We know people like the solution, but our issue is payment. And you do some experimentation, and you can even, and this gets into something called like lean startup kind of theory or approach, which is also something you can look up. I like a lot. But the idea is that every startup is sort of an experiment. So you just write down all your hypotheses. These are the things I think might or might not work, and you try to test them as fast as possible. So in the example I gave, okay, maybe people are not really wanting to pay, take out their phone and do a transfer or authorize their app to pay Naira every single time they want to ride. But maybe we want to experiment with a subscription model. So they just pay, I don't know, I'm going to make up numbers again, 2,000 Naira at the start of every month. And then they get and then they get 10 rides for free. And after that, they pay 200 Naira per ride. I don't know, right? And it makes, so now it's 200 Naira per ride, but because you're getting a guaranteed amount of business and it's upfront, you can still make the business model work. So you experiment with that. And so maybe you even just push it out on like one campus or with some of your users, right? And you test that and you see, do people like that payment method? Maybe you also at the same time, you test another package, right? Paying annually, or maybe you combine it with something else. Okay, MTN wants more presence on campus. So if they charge a certain amount of MTN data, they get discount, right? So you would do all of that kinds of experimentation. But what I would say, just coming back to your question, is I think in this market, a lot of businesses have to do a lot of iterations, like a lot of rounds of experimentation before they can really get to this star, right? Hit this sweet spot between something that people want, that you can build, but especially that economic part that you can pay for. One thing I guess that's related that I would mention is if you're running a business, but even if you're building a project, I always recommend doing some like risk analysis. So think about what are all of the risks that could potentially take down this solution. And in our context, one of them is really economic risks. Prices change, prices of suppliers, inputs, other things change, and people are now they're not going to pay for it anymore, more of a want than a need, etc. Yeah, exactly. I see your follow-up question.
Okay.
So,
wow, that's amazing.
So you always want to come back to that desirability.
Okay.
So even if you're going to change the approach, then you want to be testing it with your users, with your stakeholders. So let's, and make sure that they still want the thing. And you can do that through the kind of rapid prototypes and testing before you invest a lot in building.
All right, that's amazing. I don't know, are there any other questions for Ashley? And Paul, can you confirm that your question has been answered? Okay.
Yeah,
I've
he
seen the chat.
replied.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Thank you very much, Ashley.